Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping into a really powerful argument from J.R. Ahmed's work. It gets into a tough question. When it comes to marriage, what's actually from the Quran and what's a cultural tradition that has in some cases led to the abuse of women? The author draws a super sharp line between the two, and we're going to walk right through that distinction.
Right off the bat, the author doesn't pull any punches. We start with the stark, really disturbing reality of honor killings. This quote you're seeing, wow, it throws us right into the heart of the problem being addressed. It's just a tragic scenario, and it makes you ask, how on earth did things get to this point? Okay, let's dive into the author's analysis.
So, to really unpack this whole argument, here's our roadmap. First, we're going to dig into this idea of a clash between culture and scripture. Then, we'll get into the core explanation of what the author calls the solemn pledge of marriage in the Quran and its key principles. After that, we'll look at a really practical example, the dowry. And we'll wrap it all up with the author's final, powerful takeaway.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the clash of worlds. This is all about the conflict the author sees between some very old cultural practices and the scripture itself.
So, the central problem, according to the author, is that these absolutely devastating practices get tangled up with religion. But the source argues they aren't just cultural, they're in direct opposition to Quranic principles and, honestly, basic human rights. So, if these traditions are the problem, what does the author say is the actual principle? Let's find out.
And that leads us right to the core of the explanation, to the Quranic model for marriage. It's presented as, not just some simple ceremony, but something way more profound. Think of it as a binding, legal, and spiritual contract.
The author points directly to this verse, Quran 4:21, as the foundation for this whole idea. Now, what's really fascinating here, and this is key to the entire argument, is the specific Arabic phrase that's used for this solemn pledge. And that phrase is mithaqan ghalizan. The author explains that this isn't just any agreement, it's the strongest, most serious kind of covenant mentioned in the Quran. And because it's such a serious pledge, it absolutely 100% requires the free, unforced consent of two adults. The author argues this automatically rules out anyone, like a child, who just isn't capable of making such a huge, life-altering decision.
So, building on this idea of a powerful, binding contract, the author then lays out several core principles that have to be met for a marriage to even be considered valid, according to the Quran.
And here they are, the key conditions as laid out in the source. You can see things like full mutual consent, maturity, and financial support. For what we're talking about today, we're really going to zero in on the two that most directly challenge those abusive practices we mentioned at the start.
And this slide just breaks it down so clearly. First, no forced marriages. The author cites Quran 4:19, which pretty explicitly says you cannot force women to marry against their will. It's right there. Second, no child marriage. The argument here is that the Quran links the age of marriage to having sound judgment, which of course is essential for entering that solemn contract we were just talking about. In the author's view, it's simple. Consent has to be real, and both people have to be mature enough to give it.
Okay, so we've got the core principles down. Now let's look at a practical example the author uses to show just how massive the gap can be between a Quranic principle and a cultural practice. And that example is the dowry.
Wow, this slide just lays the conflict out perfectly. On the left side, you have the Quranic principle presented by the author. The man gives a marital gift to the bride. It belongs to her. But then on the right, you see the cultural practice, what the author calls the Jehaz sickness, where the bride's family is the one pressured to give goods and money to the groom's family. According to this source, these are complete opposites.
And the consequences of twisting this principle, they aren't small. The author includes this absolutely chilling description of dowry death to show the extreme life-or-death stakes involved. When a cultural demand completely flips a scriptural principle on its head, the author argues it can lead directly to this kind of horrific violence.
So after laying out the problem, the principles, and that really tough, practical example, what is the crucial takeaway here? What is the author's final word on all of this?
The author's conclusion is really a clear call to action. It argues that to protect women and to restore the integrity of marriage, any tradition, any interpretation, or any cultural rule that flat out contradicts the Quran has to be rejected. The ultimate argument is for a return to the foundational text as the one and only authority on the matter.
And this whole analysis really leaves us with the powerful question you see on the screen. When the principles written in a sacred text clash with the practices of the people who follow it, which one truly defines the belief? It's a challenging thought to end on, for sure, and it gets right to the heart of the complicated relationship between faith and culture.